This is David Cashman with SEB Housing. This is going to be the affordable housing information session for Halstead Salem Station. Looks like we have a couple folks on the live chat. I see your comment, Michelle Belmonte. You don't need to do anything. Actually, if you could just let me know if you can hear me, that would be helpful. Just wait for you to confirm that before I start. I'm not sure if you're still there. Can someone who's watching just confirm that they can hear me okay before I get started? Just checking here one more time. Just want to make sure the audio works. Okay, well, I'm going to get started. This is the information session for the affordable units at Halstead Salem Station. My name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing. We are the affordable housing lottery consultant that's been hired by the developer to run the lottery and to work with applicants who are interested in this opportunity. We're the ones who produce all the informational materials. Hopefully you've seen some of those. Maybe you've even applied. If you haven't, you can get them on our website, www.sebhousing.com. And if you just go to the I Want to Rent tab, and then you'll find the Halstead Salem Station thumbnail. You can click that, and you can find an information packet and application right there to download and fill out. You can also just send us an email at info@sebhousing.com and request one. We can send one to you in the mail if you'd prefer that. And then right on the application, you'll see on page 1, you can send it back to us in, right, Michelle, this is just for renting. This is not a home ownership opportunity. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for. We will be working on another project in Salem that is home ownership, but that's still several months away, maybe 6 or 8 months or even up to a year from getting going. So I'm not sure if that's what you're interested in, but yes, this is just rental that we're talking about here. But as far as submitting your application, right on the first page of the application, you can see all the different ways that you can submit it. You can submit it to us by scanning it and sending an email. You can fax it. You can put it in the mail to us, whatever works for you. Certainly emailing it is probably the easiest and fastest. So I'm going to just take you through what sort of the steps are and what this opportunity looks like. Again, I see a couple folks have joined in, so I'll just repeat. This is the affordable housing information session for Halstead Salem Station. My name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing, and I'm going to just take you through some of what to expect and what this opportunity is. Perhaps the most important thing I can tell you in this information session is that after listening to it, and after you've read the information packet and taken a look, if you are interested, I highly recommend that you get started on submitting an application. If you've looked at our application, you will see that the amount of documentation that is required is fairly extensive. It will take some time to collect all of that documentation and submit it. And even when you do submit it, in most cases, the vast majority of households do not submit a 100% complete application on the first try. And so you don't want to find yourself in a position where you've waited until the absolute last minute to submit your application, and then we respond and tell you that it's incomplete for some reason, and now you're scrambling at the last minute to get everything in in a sort of shortened deadline at that point. So early is definitely better. And I should add that while I don't encourage anyone to submit an application that they know is wildly incomplete, it's okay if it's not perfect the first time. That's okay. We'll work with you to get you to a point where it is totally complete. This is not a one bite at the apple type of situation. So, the deadline I think is July 14th. If you submit it to us next week, we'll look at it, and within 2 to 3 or 4 days, we'll let you know what the status is. And in that way, you'll have more time to work at a more comfortable pace at getting any documents that are outstanding. And I should just add on that too, even if you are really diligent and really try and read through the application really closely, and you think you've submitted absolutely everything that's requested in there, even sometimes when households have done that, the documents that they submit could raise other questions for us beyond what's in sort of the four corners of what's noted in the application. So just as an example, you might submit bank statements where there's various deposits coming in that we can't clearly tie to a job that you've noted. And so in a case like that, while you may have technically supplied the bank statements as outlined in the application, if we see all those statements and we can't link it to a job or some other source, we may have to ask questions and request additional documentation showing where that money comes from. And so it is important, and for that reason, it's important to get started earlier rather than later, because if you're in that scenario and you're waiting till the absolute last moment, again, that could be a situation where now you're scrambling to get everything into us. So without further ado, what is this affordable housing opportunity? Affordable housing means different things to different people. There are various affordable housing programs, federally and in the state. And in this particular affordable housing program, essentially, there are income and asset restrictions. And if you meet those income and asset restrictions, then you could be eligible for a unit at Salem Station at a price that is significantly below what it would be on the market. Households are expected to make enough money to support the rent on their own. However, if you are someone who does get a voucher, and that voucher is mobile and can be used at these prices and in Salem, then certainly you are permitted to use that voucher. So let's just talk a little bit first about the property itself, give you just a little bit of background on what I know about it. And again, I'm not part of the development team, and we do not work on site, so I don't have firsthand knowledge about the specific details, but I can tell you a little bit about what the development team has told me. And then from there, I'll talk about some of the requirements for eligibility, followed by what the application and lottery process looks like and what to expect after that. So Halstead Salem Station is a luxury apartment building. It's in Salem within walking distance, I understand, of the commuter rail. Units have high-end finishes and ceilings that are 9 feet high with walk-in closets and stainless steel appliances. In addition, like many other new communities, it has a wide array of community amenities that include a business lounge, TVs, gaming room, fitness center, barbecues, rooftop, sort of hangout space. There are spin bikes in the fitness facility, and I guess a turf area for outdoor games as well, among others. So this is a really luxury, nice opportunity. And again, the rents in this in the affordable program, which is what we're talking about here, are significantly less than what they would be on the market rate. In total, Halstead Salem Station has 130 units. 13 of those, so 10% of the units, are being made available through this opportunity. Those units are offered in 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom. 8 of them are 1-bedroom units and 5 of them are 2-bedroom units. All of those units, because it's brand new construction, are adaptable, but 2 of the 1-bedrooms are actually built out for persons with mobility impairments, and 3 of the 2-bedrooms are built out for persons with mobility impairments. All the rent for the 1-bedrooms is $1,625 per month, and the rent for the 2-bedrooms is $1,777 per month. Now, I should note that those rents do not include certain utilities. So in addition to that base rent, tenants would be expected to pay for gas, which includes heating, hot water, and cooking, electricity, as well as the cost of water and sewer. Pets are allowed, and each affordable unit will have access to a free parking spot on site. Michelle, there are no 3-bedroom units. I don't think there are actually any 3-bedrooms at the property at all. So that's just kind of a quick outline of the 13 units that are available. Now, I should say that those 13 units are spread out through the property. They've been approved by the city of Salem and by the state. They are relatively representative of all of the units in the building, and they are not sort of identifiable from the outside as being units that are rented through this program as contrasted to a market rate unit. And so, anyone walking through the corridors of the building would not be able to look at the door of an affordable unit and say, oh, that's an affordable unit versus, a market rate unit. Units are not all clustered together. They're not stacked one on top of another. So that's a really nice feature of this program. The idea is sort of representation, in the building in an equitable and fair manner, and sort of making this opportunity attractive and having units that are attractive within the building available through this opportunity. There are a number of sort of requirements, both in terms of who's eligible and how priority is given when we run a lottery, which I'll talk about later. But just sort of broad level, things to keep in mind, and we will discuss these a little bit more in detail as we go through, but your income and assets have to be below what is allowed by the program. When we run the lottery, we do have to take into account your household size generally and sort of need of a 2-bedroom unit. Larger households who need 2 bedrooms will be given priority for 2 bedrooms over smaller households who apply for 2 bedrooms. You can't, if you own a home, you have to sell it before you would be able to move forward. You can't own a home and at the time you're ready to sign a lease. And if anyone, and I don't think this comes up very often, but occasionally it does, but if you have any kind of financial interest or relationship, I should say financial interest in the development or relationship with the developers or the management team, then you could be considered a related party. And, for purposes of ensuring that it doesn't look like, unfair advantages being given to anyone, related parties are not permitted in this program. So let's talk a little bit about that first requirement, which is meeting the income and asset limits. The income limits are broken down by the number of persons in your household. That includes everyone who will be signing the lease and everyone who will be living there as their primary residence. If you are pregnant, it also includes an unborn child. A household size, and I should just also add that the income limits are part of a broader geographic area that actually includes many cities and towns. North Shore, Boston and surrounding towns, Metro West, and a number of towns and cities south of Boston. The income limits for a household size of 1 are $67,400. A household size of 2 can make up to $77,000. A household size of 3 can make up to $86,650. And a household size of 4 can make up to $96,250. That is gross income. It is not net income. It includes everyone in the household, with the exception that minors under the age of 18, we are not counting any income that they make from a job, and any students who are full-time. Anything over $480 does not count. So if a dad and a child are moving in as a household size of 2, and the dad makes $70,000 and the child is a full-time student, but they work and they make $10,000, it doesn't matter. We're only adding 480 of that to the dad's income. And as he makes 70,000 and the income limit is 77, in that example, they would be under the income limit. Those income limits are published every year. So the numbers I just told you are based on the 2020 income limits published by HUD. But again, those change every year, usually in April. Typically, they go up by a few $1,000s. So, but not always. And given everything that's going on right now, they could go down in future years. But something to keep in mind that the incomes do change every year. And if you're curious where the rents come from, the rents are tied to the income limits as published by HUD. So that's an important thing just to keep in mind. Unlike some affordable housing programs where income may be specific to your particular financial situation, in this program, the rent is not tied to any applicant's specific financial situation. The rents are the rents, and they don't change from one affordable housing applicant to another. Everyone is expected to be able to cover those rents, and they don't change, if you happen to make well under the income limits that I've just noted. So that's the maximum income. And I should say also, if you read through our application, you will see that income is generally defined quite broadly. And that is a program requirement that we, SEB Housing, are required to enforce. It's not something that we make up. Many people, when they think of income, they just think of sort of the most obvious one, which is employment income. But as you'll see in the application, income is quite a bit broader than that and includes many other sources of income. Now, those may not apply to you, and in that case, that's fine. You just list not applicable. But if you are getting other sources of income because you have a part-time job, self-employed, even if it's minor, you just do a little bit of side work for a couple hours a week, that's additional income on top of your regular job. If you have a household member, a family member who maybe provides you money each month to help with necessities, groceries, things like that, that's income. If you're getting, unemployment, which many people are right now, that's income. Now, some of those particular stimulus payments now we may not count and probably won't, but standard unemployment payments do count as income. So there are a whole host of other things that may count as income, and I would encourage you to just read through the application carefully because we kind of list them all out, and you'll see that they are quite a bit broader than just employment income. There's no minimum income, okay? There's no minimum income required by the program. However, applicants are expected to be able to support the rent on their own. And so what that means is we will apply the leasing office's leasing criteria if and when you apply for the lottery to make sure that you make enough money to afford the rent. Now, let me explain a little bit further. after applying for the program is just one step in this process, but you also have to be lease eligible, which we have nothing to do with. SEB Housing is purely involved in assessing applicants to determine whether they're eligible for the program, but we don't ask you for things like any criminal background that you might have. We're not asking for things related to your credit. We're not following up with any prior landlords to see if you've been a good tenant, nothing like that. So we are not making any of those determinations. However, we've been in touch with the leasing office and we know what their rent to income ratio sort of tenant screening figure is. And we know that they require tenants to make about 3 times the rent in order to show that they can support the rent each month. And so what that means is for a 1-bedroom unit, if you're applying for a 1-bedroom unit, we'll look to see if you make about $55,000, give or take. And for a 2-bedroom unit, we'll see if you make about a little under $61,000. Now, that analysis that we do is going to be much less rigorous and much less sort of exacting than the one we do to make sure that you're under the program income limits. And again, the reason for that is because the income limits, the ceiling, that's a program requirement. The minimum income is just something that we know the leasing office is eventually going to require. And it's a disservice to you and everyone involved to sort of move you along in the process if we know that down the road you're ultimately just going to be denied because you don't make enough to support the rent. Now, I do want to add a couple of caveats to that. One is, if you have a lot in assets that you can draw down from, we're not going to screen you out of the lottery just because your income limit is less than those numbers that I've just noted. So if you're applying for a 1-bedroom unit, again, I've just said that the leasing office would expect you to make about $55,000 in change. Well, if you only make $35,000, but you have $200,000 in the bank, then, we'd say, yeah, that's, money you can draw down on to support the rent. And we're not going to screen you out for that reason. Another important caveat is if you have a voucher of any kind that's mobile, none of these minimum income requirements apply to you. So you would just note that on your application. There's a box and a question about it. You note that you have a voucher. You would supply the voucher. And in that case, we would not be doing any minimum income screening for you. Income, I should say also just generally, is a projection of what you likely will make over the next 12 months. Obviously, that is not a perfectly exacting science. Things can change. Nobody knows exactly what they're going to make in the next 12 months. But your history of work and what you've been making is obviously very pertinent in that analysis, and therefore we are looking at what you've made recently and asking for things like recent pay stubs and taxes as a indicator of that. But obviously, if you were making, $80,000 recently, but have lost a job and are now just making, just receiving unemployment, well, that's a change, right? And now the fact that, if you have no expectation of being rehired on that job, we're not going to continue to assume that you would make that salary. Okay. So again, income is counted broadly, and the general idea is our best estimate of what you will be making over the next 12 months with a consideration of what you have been making recently to inform that calculation. As part of the program application, you also need to supply information about your assets. Now, the thing about assets is there's no asset limit. So someone who happens to have a lot of money in assets is not going to be screened out for having a lot in assets. Contrast that with someone who's over the income limit, that would make you program ineligible. But for that reason, there's really no reason to be, particularly concerned about being screened out if you do have a lot in assets, because for the most part, it doesn't matter much. Now, that being said, if you have assets that generate income, we do have to take that income and apply it towards the income limit. So if you have a bank accounts don't really generate much income, but if you have some kind of asset, maybe you have a rental property, that's an asset, and the money that you get there, well, that's income. So that would be added towards your income total. Or if you have, mutual funds or something like that, and you get money from those would be added towards the income limits. As I said towards the beginning, if you do own a home, that is an asset. The home would need to be sold before you're allowed to sign a lease, and the equity that you have in the home is what we count. But again, as there's no asset limit, even owning a home is not going to put you over the asset limit. I should also just add here, folks, I know we're almost 30 minutes into this already. If you have questions, and I hope that no one was sort of holding on to those, but if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to include them in the sidebar next to where you see me. I'm happy to kind of stop and address those. This is for your benefit. I'm going through some of the points that I hope will be informative and salient, but if there's something you're dying to know or a question you want to ask, please feel free to write that in and I will respond to it. When you fill out your application, I had touched on this a little bit at the beginning. This isn't so much a requirement of the program, but it's just something to keep in mind so you understand how things work when we do the lottery. But the program makes us take into account essentially what is an appropriate household size for the 2-bedroom units. This is inapplicable to the 1-bedroom units because everyone gets the same priority for a 1-bedroom unit. But for 2-bedroom units, the program makes us give priority for households who it would say need those 2 bedrooms. So let me just give you sort of a concrete example. Any household that has 4 members in it needs 2 bedrooms. You can't have 4 people living in a 1-bedroom unit. Any household with 3 people in it needs 2 bedrooms, okay? And there are other examples too. On the contrary, a 1-person household or a couple, like a married couple, by program rules, are considered to only need 1 bedroom. And so when you fill out your application, one of the first questions is going to ask you to say what your household type is. In this lottery, there are type 2 households and type 1 households. Type 2 are households who, by program requirements, need 2 bedrooms. Type 1 households are households who, by program requirements, really only need 1 bedroom. They might want 2 bedrooms and they can apply for 2 bedrooms. They just don't need 2 bedrooms. So what that means is when we do the lottery, we'll draw the numbers out of a box, and then afterwards we have to sort them. And if a type 1 household has applied for a 2-bedroom unit, even if they're the first household picked in the lottery, they're going to be skipped over by every type 2 household who was pulled after them, who also applied for that 2-bedroom unit. Why? Because per the program rules, type 2 households have priority over type 1 households for 2-bedroom units, okay? But type 2 households do not have priority over type 1 households for 1-bedroom units. So I guess all of this is to say you can apply for both. You can apply for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom. You may be eligible for both, and if you are, you'll be in the lottery and you'll have positions on both waiting lists. If you're only eligible for one, we'll let you know which one that is, and you'll only be on that waiting list. There is no downside to applying for both. And in fact, if you have any inclination that you could be interested and satisfied with either a 1 or 2-bedroom unit, I highly recommend that you check off both when you complete your lottery application. If you don't check off one of them, and then later on after the lottery say, oh shoot, I changed my mind, I wish I had also applied for a 2-bedroom, at that point, you can't just go back and change it, okay? So can't stress highly enough, if you have any inclination that you could be interested in either or both of a 1 or a 2 bedroom, mark off both when you complete your lottery application. There's absolutely no downside. And if you're eligible for both, you'll have a position on both waiting lists for 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. You may not have the same position, but you'll have a position, and you really only do yourself a disservice if you fail to check off one of the household sizes that you might be interested in, and then change your mind later. If there's anyone who's going through a divorce, so I'm just sort of changing pace now for a couple other common questions, and then I'll get back into some of how the lottery is going to work and what to expect after the lottery. And again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to write them in the dialogue box to the right of where you see me. If a household happens to be married but is going through a divorce, you'll want to submit evidence that that process has been undertaken and is started. If it's just something that's being contemplated, we have to consider the spouse's financial picture in the application. So you'd want to demonstrate that that's something that has been started. For homeowners going through a divorce, you'd have to make sure that you get yourself off the deed, either through finalizing the divorce or through a quitclaim deed before you can sign a lease. And if you do demonstrate that the divorce process has begun, typically, unless it's a particularly complicated divorce or there's a lot of assets and other things at play, the fact that it has been started is sufficient for us to analyze your application as a single or without having to factor in the spouse's income and assets. Okay. So this is all kind of part of the broader first step in this process. The first step is read the information packet, read through the application. If you have questions, reach out to us. We'll be happy to work through it with you, and submit an application. When you submit an application, we'll look through it. We'll let you know if and whether you're eligible or whether anything's missing. If you're eligible, you'll get a letter that tells you, here's when the lottery is going to be, here's what you applied for, here's your household type, and here's your application number. Everyone gets an application number. That number will be in the form of A.XXX, whatever that number is. And that is purely in the order that we approve households. But it exists to keep everyone's information anonymous when we do the lottery. And your lottery application number has no bearing whatsoever on priority or how you'll be able to move through this process relative to the other lottery households. It is nothing more than an anonymous identifier. It doesn't happen often, but I have seen it happen where households on the lottery night think that they're in the lottery, but they have no idea what their application number is because they never got one because they were never eligible. So if the application deadline is coming up, for you in a month from now, say it's, close to July 14th, and you don't have a lottery application number, that is your signal to get in touch with us to figure out what's going on, because everyone who's going to be in the lottery will have a lottery application number. Now, we will be communicating with you through the process, so hopefully, you should know exactly where you stand, and that you shouldn't be sort of guessing, come July 14th. But again, it doesn't happen often, but I have seen it happen where, household thinks they're in the lottery and it turns out they just never completed their application. They don't have an application number. And so just make sure that, if you do think you're going to be in this lottery, that you do have an application number. So the lottery drawing, it will be on YouTube, same as this, and by way of a phone call. All of the application numbers will be put in a box, and I'll pull them out one by one and announce them as we go. And those numbers will be put on the lottery results list. Okay, but unlike most lotteries where there's, quote unquote winners and losers, everyone in this lottery gets picked and everyone gets a position on a waiting list that they're eligible for. So now it may not be the exact position you want, but you will have a position on the waiting list. Now, no matter how many times I say this, after the lottery, households are always asking, who won, who lost, did I win? Nobody wins, okay? Everyone gets picked, everyone gets a position on a waiting list. The waiting list, in turn, determine the order that you'll get to move forward in the next step in the process, which is to apply for a lease. So obviously, having a higher waiting list position is better than having a lower waiting list position, because higher waiting list position households will get invited to move forward before lower waiting list position households. There are going to be 4 waiting lists generated by the lottery. There's a waiting list for 6 one-bedroom apartments, a waiting list for 2 two-bedroom apartments, a waiting list for 2 one-bedroom disabled accessible apartments, and a waiting list for 3 two-bedroom disabled accessible apartments. Only households in need of a disabled accessible unit will be on those waiting lists. Okay, but if there aren't sufficient households who actually need those units, those could be made available to households who don't need those features. That being said, so for most households, chances are you'll probably be on either just the one-bedroom waiting list, which again has 6 units, or the 2-bedroom waiting list, which has 2 units. On the 2-bedroom waiting list, all type 2 households will be above all type 1 households. And on the 1-bedroom waiting list, the type 2 and the type 1 households will just be mixed together in whatever order they were drawn. But just to go back to what I touched on earlier, if you are a type 1 household and you applied for a 2-bedroom unit, even if you're drawn first in the lottery, all of the type 2 households drawn after you will jump ahead of you on that 2-bedroom waiting list. Okay? So the waiting list determine the order that households get to move forward in that next step, which is being invited to move forward to apply for a lease with the leasing office. We sort of hand you off to the leasing office because we aren't the leasing office. We're not involved in that next step in the process. It's important to remember, if you get to this point, you've done a great job. You've submitted your lottery application on time. You've been deemed eligible. You have taken a great step towards in moving forward in this process. However, you haven't taken the final step because, as I said before, we don't do any determination about whether you're lease eligible. That's what you do in this next step in the process. And so, unfortunately, it happens. It does happen, that a household could be program eligible, and they get very excited. They have a high waiting list position determined by the lottery. They're thrilled. And then they go to apply for a lease. And unfortunately, the leasing office does their screening and says, unfortunately, Mr. Smith, your credit does not meet our credit requirements. And therefore, you're not lease eligible. And therefore, we cannot rent an apartment to you. And we're so sorry. And that is unfortunate, but that is a very real possibility. And so something just to keep in mind, if you are someone who knows you have, credit that's not so great, or something in your background that could be a red flag for a leasing office, please do not confuse program eligibility, which is what we SCB Housing do, with lease eligibility. They're 2 totally distinct considerations, and you could be eligible for one, not the other, and vice versa. That being said, even if you don't have a super high waiting list position, and you're a little bit bummed out because you got this far and you're eligible for the lottery, and then we do the drawing and we sort it out, and you get the waiting list the night of, and you say, shucks, I'm number 20 on the list. That's not where I want it to be. I want it to be higher than that. Well, we put it right there in the information packet that in most cases, in our experience, the leasing offices have to screen anywhere from 3 to 4 times as many households as there are units to fill them all. And that's because sometimes people aren't lease eligible. Sometimes they lose interest. Sometimes they're in lotteries for other properties and they have their heart set on the other property and that opportunity comes up. There's myriad reasons why someone who has a high waiting list position may actually ultimately not lease a unit. And so the reason I say this is because if you get the waiting list the night of the lottery and you don't have a very high spot and you're kind of despairing about that, you shouldn't. I mean, it is possible you may not get invited right away and may not get to move forward right after the lottery, but it is also quite possible that enough households ahead of you won't lease units and a unit could still be available to you. So even if you don't have one of the very top waiting list positions, I would just encourage you to kind of hang in there because it is still possible that your turn could come up. Sometimes people ask, I have concern about, something related to my lease eligibility and, maybe if I could have a co-signer or a guarantor, that would kind of push me over the hump in being deemed lease eligible. For better or worse in this program, there are no guarantors or co-signers allowed. So you can't have a family member, if you've got credit that doesn't meet the leasing office's requirements, pulling in a family member with great credit and a lot of money to guarantee that the rent will be paid. Unfortunately, the program does not allow that. So keep that in mind. When you do get invited, if you do get invited, I should say, if you do get invited to move forward in that next step after the lottery of applying for a lease, then you can choose from any of the units that are available on the waiting list that you're invited from. So let's say you have the first spot on the 1-bedroom waiting list. And a week after we've run the lottery, the leasing office reaches out to you and says, hey, we're inviting you forward to apply for a lease and, you've got 5 days to come in and do that. And you do. They will tell you all of the 1-bedroom units that are in this program at the property. And you can choose from any of those, okay? Whether that unit is ready that day, in 2 weeks, in 2 months, okay? Because not all of these units are going to be ready at exactly the same time. And in fact, if you're the number one household or any household really, but you may be in that position and say, actually, the unit I really want is the one that's coming online a month from now, or it's the one that's coming online from 2 months from now. That's okay. You can reserve that unit. So you get to choose from any of those units that are available. And then once you've reserved that unit, the household behind you gets to choose from any of the units that are left, and so on and so forth until all of the units have been reserved and then eventually rented. If you are one of the people who unfortunately gets far enough that you get into the lottery and you don't get invited to move forward and all the units get reserved ahead of you, that is a bummer. Unfortunately, that can happen. But I think perhaps the one good piece is you don't lose that position. Okay, so let's just say hypothetically that the six your number, let's just say to make it easy, you're number 7 on that 1-bedroom waiting list that has 6 units. Okay, and the 6 households ahead of you all get invited forward and they reserve and lease those 1-bedroom units, and you're standing there with no units left. You would then be number 1 on that waiting list sort of for future purposes. Okay, so if in a year from now one of those households moves out, you're going to be the first person that gets contacted to say, hey, so and so has moved out, we've got a unit opening up, are you still interested? And you can move forward at that time. So there is that benefit of being in the lottery, that you will retain that waiting list position for future purposes, even if you don't get the opportunity to move forward right away after the lottery. If you are someone who does get to reserve and lease a unit, great, and you have questions about what happens in future years, well, every year in this program, you have to recertify. You have to demonstrate that, in year 2, your income didn't double, and now you're, totally ineligible for the program. So every year you have to resubmit that income and asset documentation to demonstrate continued eligibility for the program. Now, that may be with SEB Housing. If we stay on, it may not. But whether we do or don't, it has to be done. The good news is you will have already submitted, an application and all the documentation to get into the lottery. So it should be a somewhat more familiar process to you by that point and easier. Additionally, for households who are already in units, the income limits significantly increase in year 2 when you're recertifying. So just to give you an example, if you're a household of 1 member right now and you're applying to get into the lottery, you can make up to $67,400. You rent a unit in year 2, you've got to recertify. Now how much can you make? Well, in year 2, you can make $94,360 in this example. Now, it won't be exactly that because in year 2, the initial eligibility number will change, and so will the recertification number. But you can make up to 140% of the initial eligibility income limit and still be eligible for the program. So in this example, you can make almost $30,000 more and remain eligible for the program in year 2 when you have to recertify. So if you're, boss is offering you a raise, you don't necessarily need to, turn that down for fear that could disqualify you. So that is kind of a synopsis of it, folks. I think all of the information, like I said at the beginning, is, or not all, but a lot of information is in the information packet, which is available on our website. The application is available on our website and will take you through in sort of excruciating detail what is required. I should note that given the current pandemic, if we do recognize that certain documents are harder to get. So if there's something that the application calls for and you make a good faith effort and can't get it, we will work with you because we do recognize that certain things just are very difficult to come by at this time. But the most important thing is if after reading the information packet and and watching this video, you think that you are interested and you think you might be eligible, get that application done and get it in as early as you can, because you do not want to wait till the 11th hour to do it and then find yourself, potentially scrambling to, to finish it up before the deadline. Are there any questions? I haven't had any so far, but if anyone does have any questions, I'm happy to address them. Or if you think of something later on, tomorrow or in a week from now, or after you've read through the material some more and you didn't know to ask it tonight, that's okay. You can reach out to us. Our information is in the materials. It's on the first page of the application. So just shoot us an email, give us a call, and we'll be happy to talk you through it. I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but however you want to submit the application, we can take it by email, we can take it by fax, you can put it, in snail mail, whatever works for you. But again, probably the most important thing that you can take away from tonight is if you do think you're interested, get that application in early, and we'll work with you. So I'll hang out for a minute here just to see if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, and I can address those. And if you don't, that's fine. And we hope to see your application, and you can get in touch with us if you have any questions about anything. And thank you to everyone who tuned in, and I hope that this was helpful. Okay, I think that's it, folks. So please let us know if there's anything that comes up, and I wish you all the best of luck in submitting your application. It's a great opportunity, and we hope to see your application soon. Stay safe, thanks, and have a great night.